and self-control. These things we ask in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Roger. All right, the time is 9:01. We'll call the meeting to order. Amanda, could you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Richardson?
Here.
Commissioner Thayer?
Here.
Commissioner Pettit?
Here. All righty, first item we have is approval of the agenda. Do we have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the agenda as presented.
I'll second.
All righty, we have a motion and a second for approval of the agenda as presented. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye, motion carries. Consent agenda?
I'll move that we approve the consent agenda as presented.
I second.
Okay, motion to approve the consent agenda as presented. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye, motion. Elected official, department head, staff.
Any elected officials want to go first? Okay. Just a couple updates from the staff side. First, from the finance team, we are starting our 2020 budget process. We have pretty much wrapped up the audit, and I'll be talking about that under discussion items. But we are now looking at the quarterly and monthly financials and getting projections in for year end. And we've started having some informal talks with the elected officials and the directors about 2020 projects and 2020 funding. I'll have to get with the assessor's office and try to dig up what the revenue projections look like as far as what we can go in with, and that'll drive a lot of the budget expense lines. But we haven't forgot about the budget. We've just been really tied up with audit, and we are getting ready to get serious about budget for, especially after the mid-year financials close out, the end of June. Once those financials are done, that'll give us a pretty good projection on our spend rates as far as the first half of the year. It'll also give us a pretty good projection on what projects we may need to roll over into next year that we can't get done, or new projects that need to be brought in. Any questions I can answer on that?
Not for me.
Okay. Another little update then on facilities. As you know, we have been working hard to do an assessment, condition assessment of all our current buildings and some future planning to take a look at what we might need as far as space. And in all our facilities, we did get several, I think we got 4 or 5 really good proposals in. We have prioritized them. We're inviting 3 back for presentations, and once we get through that stage, we'll figure out, we'll award that RFP, award the proposal for that facilities condition assessment, still scheduled to be done in late fall sometime. We also, as you may know, we have closed the application period for the facilities manager, and that we got, I think I counted 25 or 26 resumes in on that application, so we are calling back several for face-to-face interviews, and I believe that's scheduled next week sometime. We're in the process of making that. So we are moving forward with facilities, very happy with that, and we continue to give you updates as needed. Okay. I think, Christina, you want to talk about XXNZ?
Christina Stanton, Director of CDS. I just wanted to give a quick update. As you know, notices were mailed out to the prisoners or NZ designation for their property. Those were mailed out May 15th. We've had a number of phone calls, emails, and other conversations since then, mostly positive. Most folks are very appreciative that we're getting this cleaned up. A lot of these have been lingering for 20, 30 years. The ad in the paper ran May 30th, June 6th, and will be in this week's June 13th in Elbert County News. We're scheduled to be at the June 18th Planning Commission, which is next week, and June 26th, Board of County Commissioners, to try to clean up the majority of those. There are a few that we'll come back to later in the year that are the ones that are classified as industrial, commercial in the assessors classes and subclasses, or are less than an acre, and will take a little bit more research.
So if I'm listening carefully enough here, very soon the majority of this NZ XX nonsense will go away.
Correct. I think there's 40-some properties that we'll still have to clean up later this year, but
And most of those have unique circumstances.
correct.
I know it's been well, you said, well, those have lingered for 30 years or more, so it's good to get it.
In the process of going through and doing the notices and getting it all put together, we discovered that some of the properties we had an XX or an in-town limits for a couple of the towns. Had to explain that to towns, no, you cannot rezone your properties. And, you know, apparently we have inaccurate information, get the correct information, clean it up. So we did have a few learning curves.
Just as a side, one of the things that is being cleaned up is the Norton Cemetery out by where we live. And I asked, you're rezoning it to AR, is that right?
I have to look at my list again because I don't have memorized.
Anyway, I asked her if cemeteries, if there was a difference between permanent and temporary residences.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we have a handful of cemeteries that there's a two-part cleanup for them. One is giving them actual zoning since they don't have zoning, and the other is addressing cleanup in our regulations, because right now we have cemeteries as a special use and only allowed in certain districts. Most governments allow them as a permitted by right in majority, if not all, districts, simply because there's a lot of additional regulation at state levels revolving cemeteries typically.
Thank you.
All right, move on to open public comment. If anybody's got anything they'd like to bring to our attention that's not on the agenda for today, that's... Hello, Chris.
Hello.
Please give your name and address.
81 Gold Creek Drive, Elbert County, unincorporated. Say that I was at the dentist yesterday, and the lady asked where I lived, and I said, well, I live in Gold Creek Meadows. And then she said, where is that? I said, well, it's off Pine Ridge, which has now been changed to County Road 13. So I assume that means the county now recognizes it is part of the county and not part of the town. And she said, well, why did they not pave from the top of the road down to the highway or County Road 136? And I said, well, went through the history. Don't need to go through that with you guys, as you know. The budget's coming up. The county and the town still are at somewhat odds. It becomes a no man's land. It's also a speed zone that comes down off the pavement down onto the road and down into the dirt road. The town is responsible for maintenance only, not for construction of the new road. I have the paperwork, and I've talked to Mike Duvall, and I've talked to you gentlemen. The town could blade that road every day, put water on it every day. It's costing them a lot of money to do this. I know you have the budget coming up. I know we have priorities. One priority in my mind is the jail and the sheriff's department. I know you have new buildings that you need to move into. But the county, in my opinion, created this issue. It is a major connector, in my opinion. It could be called a minor connector. But you want growth in Elizabeth, in the town of Elizabeth. And that I believe, Sam, you're saying that the county is not going to pave any more roads than they have to. They hope that developers were going to do that. Well, Rotorua was going to pave it. They make changes, life happens. So I want to make sure it's on the agenda or on the budget to consider working with the town to get that road paved. It really is a benefit to not only Elizabeth, but to the county.
Thanks, Christina. Just some background for the folks that are here, and I know you had the IGA, a copy of the IGA. The right-of-way is owned by the county. There's been an agreement in place for over a decade that the town provide maintenance. They receive all the tax dollars associated with it. And in there is also sole discretion to the town on paving. So it is something we need to work with them, because right now we pass to them the authority to pave, at least for the last decade. So if they want to back out of the IGA, or renegotiate it, that's fine. But it is critical infrastructure, because not only is it as you said, a main road in and out of town to the south, it's also buried beneath that is the main water lines that run between the town pumps and the town water storage. So all the water the town uses flows up that hill and down underneath, and I suspect that's why the town wanted to make sure they were the only ones disturbing the surface of that road, but it is something that needs to be worked through, so thanks. Do we have any other public comment?
Good morning, my name is Larry Gable. My address is 33265 Wyndham Circle. I live in Wild Point. Been here about a year. My wife and I bought last year, April, and there's been a couple of concerns. I'm not real familiar with the history of the area, but we were at a Metro 86 Water District meeting a month or so ago, and there was a line item about sales, and they're selling water. I understand that our water in Wild Point comes from the Arapahoe-Denver Basin, but they own the water rights to the Upper Dawson and Lower Dawson, is my understanding. They're also selling that water, and we kind of pressed them as to who they were selling it to and for how much, and they were very vague on that. And I just found out this morning they're not allowed to sell it outside the county. So I think it needs to be looked into to make sure that they're not profiting wrongly on this. They said that they could do this because they're not drawing down anywhere near the water that was projected for their usages. So that's why they're allowed to do it. Another issue I want to bring up is our road maintenance. They also told us that the road had been signed over to the county that goes through all the roads in Wild Point. And my wife and I walk on a daily basis, and there are cracks as wide as 4 inches across the road, about every 30 or 40 feet. I guess that's where the paving stopped and started. And they supposedly have turned it over to you, and I understand through a friend that you are only responsible for snow removal for safety issues. So I'd like to get this resolved too, if possible, as to who's going to maintain the road, because this is the time to get out there and fix those cracks. So, thank you.
Thanks. Yeah. Just again, what the water district can do with their water is defined in their service plan, so we can pull that up and see what they truly were allowed to do with the water within that district. And as for the roads, yeah, they're some of them have been accepted by the county. Some are still under the developer's responsible. Some are in warranty. Some portions of, like Legacy Trail itself has several hundred yards where there's orange cones all over that have not been accepted by the county. The developer's got to bring those up for standard. But I've got a meeting with a couple of citizens next week to kind of talk through that with them and to make sure that there is some clarity on who's responsible for what. The snow removal, we will take care of life, health, safety things out there always for our citizens, but we want to make sure the developer's taking care of his responsibilities too. So I understand the frustration, and we share that as well. So. I understand. Yeah, thank you, sir. All right. Do we have any other public comment? Okay, seeing that.
Just as a point, though, when you make that, is those special districts assessments, the county gets none of that money.
I know.
Yeah, but they are. And
They're maxed out on it, supposedly.
all right. Okay. Next item we have up are discussion items, and we have Mr. Penn from USGS.
Hi, my name is Colin Penn. I'm a hydrologist with the Colorado Water Science Center. And today I'll be mostly going over a recent report from a study that we published on groundwater levels in the Denver Basin here in Elbert County that was funded by the Elbert County Board of County Commissioners on a joint and partially funded by the Colorado Water Conservation Board initially to help set up this study. The outline of this presentation will mostly go over this report, which is available at that website, and I have some bound printed copies in the back if anyone is interested in taking one home. I have a few of those available.
The report was also published as part of the board packet, if anybody wants to pull it offline.
So just a basin aquifers, all four and all four aquifer units have their eastern extent extending out through Elbert County. Most of them are considered confined throughout the county, except the Upper Dawson, because that is open to the surface. There's no confining unit above it, so that's considered unconfined aquifer. The other four aquifer units are considered confined, where there's a confining unit above them that helps differentiate between the aquifer units. You can see the layering of them there. So at the beginning of the study, this well network was initially set up by hydrologist Rhett Everett, who's now in the California Water Science Center. He initially set up this study and did a lot of the measurements through October 2017, which is when I started taking over the study and helping with measurements. So to select wells, we used a combination of well density within the network to see where there were available wells to set up a network, as well as a statistic from the Denver Basin model that came out in 2011, which was published by our Associate Director for Hydrologic Studies, Suzanne Paschke. And they used a statistic to see where additional well information might help in future runs. So that's this OPA statistic, and that's specific to the Arapahoe aquifer. They also used from that study a future projection of drawdown and where drawdown might occur future more through I believe it was 2003 through 2053, and that's represented by these contour lines. So you can see that for the Upper Dawson, Lower Dawson, and Arapahoe aquifers and Denver aquifer, those are focused on the western portion of the county as well as some isolated areas throughout the county. And then after they identify these target areas, they used a solicitation from property owners who would be willing to allow USGS personnel to access the well on their property on a regular basis. And we got replies from several areas and set up a network of 42 wells throughout the county. This is the distribution of them. You can see that most of them are, for the Laramie and Fox Hills aquifer, are out in the eastern plains. Same thing with the Arapahoe as you get into the Denver wells, so towards the central part of the county, and then Upper and Lower Dawson wells focused in the Elizabeth, Kiowa, and Elbert areas. So we had a total of 11 in the Upper Dawson, 10 in the Lower Dawson, 7 in the Denver, 9 in the Arapahoe aquifer, and 5 in the Laramie Fox Hills. At 6 of the wells, the homeowners allowed us to set up continuous instruments. So that would be a pressure transducer lowered into the well. You can connect to it from the surface through a vented communications cable, and that's what this little port is right here. So we're never removing the pressure transducer. It stays in the well, and we download it at regular intervals when we go out to make measurements. And the distribution of those are shown in these red circles on the map. So the Laramie Fox Hills site is there, the Denver Basin pressure transducer is there, and the 3 Dawson aquifers continuous sites are there.
So
and
those record the data between?
Yeah, those record between measurements. They record hourly, and the data that we use for the study are the daily maximum. And the reason we use the throughout the household. sort of accurate of all the wells. We did a real-time kinematic global navigation satellite system study. This was to determine an accurate location for mapping the location of the wells, as well as determining an accurate land surface elevation that's on a common datum, so that elevations across the county could be compared more accurately. And this was completed in June 2017 and then finished in May. So starting in February, June, July, August, and October, and December throughout the year. Taking a discrete measurement depth to water, so either using a steel tape, getting a water level line reading and then subtracting the distance that's in the water, or a calibrated electronic tape that sends out a signal back to the surface when you hit the water surface. And then at the continuous sites, like I said, those measure water every hour, and we would get a comparison reading every time we'd go to correct these discrete measurements. We'd also get a continuous reading so we can see if there's any instrument drift, and we correct those back in the office. If there's a big enough drift that's needed, then we have some standard protocols that help determine when we apply a correction or not. And then from those land surface elevations that I talked about in the previous slide, we calculated a groundwater elevation from that depth to water from the land surface down, so that everything is being compared on a common datum. And these are some pictures from some of the wells throughout the county using the electronic tape. I don't have any pictures from the steel tape because it's usually a one-person job that requires a lot of hand movements and juggling of equipment, so hard to take a picture while you're doing that. So from those groundwater elevation measurements, I conducted a trend analysis using a linear regression or a linear regression with seasonality terms. And the reason why you need both of those to see what's going on the groundwater levels is you might have some sites that have a very linear trend or linear pattern, and those would be represented by this top equation. And the slope term through time is just dependent on the time factor. Some of the sites you can see have a bigger seasonal pattern, and so to compute a regression for those, we included these seasonal sine and cosine terms that help kind of build in that seasonal pattern, and then you can also compute that same trend per year value more accurately by including the seasonality. And a trend was considered significant if this beta value, this feet per year trend had a p-value of less than 0.10, so that means that there's only a 10% chance that you'd get that value by kind of random chance alone. And then also if the coefficient of determination, so how well that trend fit the data, was greater than 0.40 or exceeding more than 40% of the variability in those measurements. And then also from the discrete measurements, we calculated an absolute difference and potentiometric surface maps from the April 2015 and April 2018 measurements, and then used those for an ordinary kriging, which is a spatio-temporal interpolation of water levels throughout the county between measurement points, so across the entire county. And that was conducted in ArcGIS using just the default parameters that you can use. There's more advanced techniques that I'll go into a little bit at the end of this, but we just used the ordinary kriging for this study. So kind of a quick measurement overview. Some of the issues we encountered using domestic wells is that there were about 8 sites that were a third of the measurements were non-static. And so for this study, I should kind of go back a second and say that for the trend analysis and for the the ordinary kriging and potentiometric surface. We only used wells that we only used static measurements for those wells because non-static measurements, if the water level is slowly rising or is being actively pumped up and down, could cause unnecessary variability and are not representative of the true conditions at that time. So having wells that are have measurements with non-static conditions can kind of reduce the available data that you can use for the study. So most of the sites were very good, but you can see some of these represented by the triangles. You can see there's some trend there, but we don't know what the exact water level or static level is at that time, and so we can't use the data from that. And of the 800 measurements that we took, only 16%, 17% were considered non-static conditions, so pretty low. And that was mostly at 8 sites where what we called frequent offenders, where more than 1/3 of the measurements were non-static at those sites. So most of the sites were pretty good. There's just a couple of them. And then occasionally we would miss measurement opportunities when we encountered things like dogs, like aggressive dogs at some of the sites that are nipping at us or not allowing us to get the time to get a measurement in. And so we would just have to, sort of for our own safety and for the dogs, I guess, well-being, not spend a lot of time on site and get out of there. And then occasionally we would encounter, at some of these ranches, if they were on vacation or we couldn't get a hold of the homeowner, a locked gate that prevented us from getting to the well.
Your chart indicated some that were affected by nearby pumping. What kind of the definition of nearby, or how close affects?
It's hard to know exactly where the nearby pumping is coming from, if it's irrigation, if they're using a hydrant somewhere else on the property. But when we take a measurement, we collect one and then we read it and then wait about 3 to 5 minutes and then collect a second one. And if they're not within 0.02 feet of one another, then we know something's going on. We'll take subsequent measurements until we establish. So if you can see a slow rise between those measurements, then we know it's been recently pumped and it's recovering. If we see kind of a general decline, then we usually attribute that to nearby pumping, and we don't know the source. Sometimes you can see the source if you can see a center pivot, going on. And then occasionally we would be there when there's active pumping going on, where the well, we get a level here and here and here and here, and we choose the highest one but label it with a pumping status because we can't get an accurate reading, and we can't really attribute any sort of direction to those readings.
So is there some kind of a distance versus transient pressure effects there that if a well, close by well, if it's a half a mile away, is it going to affect you, or does it have to be, and I'm being silly, within 10 feet?
You'd have to look at, I guess, the conductivity values of each individual well and what it's like around there to determine how far an influence might be, but we didn't do any sort of analysis to see what sort of radius would be influenced by pumping. We would just, if we saw a gradual decline in levels, we just attributed it to nearby pumping. That's kind of our standard protocol. And then finally, we did have 4 sites in the study dropped. So 2 current property owners asked to be removed from the study, and then 2 properties that were subsequently sold to new property owners. As the new property owner came on and we asked permission to continue measurements, they declined to continue with the study. So a quick measurement overview. This is most of the summary information presented in Table 3. And just an overview, the M stands for missing, if there's a measurement from either the April 2015 or April 2018 measurement. And that was usually attributed to one of those discontinued sites or a property access issue if there was a change in ownership. And then some of these, you can see there are large differences, 32 feet, 21 feet, 32, 21. So those have little subscripts next to them indicating that one of those measurements in either April 2015 or 18 was affected by a non-static condition. And so that difference, although we didn't include it for the calculation of the maps, it is in this table. So in the Upper Dawson, there were 5 wells with a positive difference between the April 2015 and April 2018 measurements, and 4 with a negative difference. 1 had no change and 1 was missing. In the lower Dawson, only 2 wells had a positive difference, and actually one of those wells, the lower Dawson 14 well, that kind of exhibits patterns that are more consistent with the upper Dawson. And looking at the well record, although the bottom of that is in the lower Dawson, we're suspect that the perforated sections actually penetrate into the upper Dawson. So that well was included in the study, but it should be noted that we suspect there might be some connection to the upper Dawson in that well. What's notable about the lower Dawson wells is that there were 3 of the 8 with differences between the April 2015 and 2018 that had greater than 5 feet difference between the study periods. In the Denver aquifer, there was 1 site with a missing measurement and 2 with a positive difference, but both were affected by non-static conditions. And then 4 with negative differences, and again, one of those with non-static in the well, I should say. In the Arapahoe aquifer, you had 3 sites with positive differences and 6 with negative, and then finally in the Laramie site with a positive, but that site is known to be next to some pivot irrigation and has a really non-regular seasonal pattern, which I'll show you later. The negative difference, and then 1 site with missing data that was attributed to a well owner that was dropped from the network. So these differences are useful for showing relative changes in spatial patterns, but it's important that throughout the study period, snapshot of the April 2015 and April 2018 periods. And we used that period, we used April because it's comparable to the Division of Water Resource reports that they also put out for the Denver Basin, which include, I think, about 22 wells in Elbert County, but those are measured just annually.
Are those 22 wells separate from the?
Yeah, they are separate. Some of the trend now, so this is, now I'll jump from aquifer. We had 3 sites that showed a negative trend that was significant. Laramie 5 and 6 are co-located right next to one another, and so they had a very similar trend, which is encouraging that 2 sites next to one another are consistent. That's a good check on the measurement quality and of the trends. And then Laramie 3 and 4 had, like I said, had those non-regular seasonal patterns that are kind of affecting the availability of either a linear trend being computed, which is why you see 1 site where the linear was negative and the linear with seasonality was positive, and then 1 nearby next to it where it's showing a positive trend, but the irregular patterns affecting those trends. And so I'll show you one of those sites is one of the ones interested. So we'll see how continuous measurements helped compute a trend site later on. In the Arapahoe aquifer, there was 1 site with a positive trend out in the sort of by the east end, and then 4 sites with a trend. And you can kind of note that all the ones that were significant throughout the study period are less than 1 foot per year change, so a very small negative trend throughout those sites. In the Denver aquifer, we only had 1 site that had a significant trend, and it was minus 1.0 feet per year, and that's this site right here. And a lot of the other sites that didn't have significant trends, those are indicated by these black circled sites. Denver 17, there was not enough static measurements to compute a trend. That was one of the frequent offenders that I referred to. At Denver 13, which is this one up here, measurements were discontinued in 2016 with a new property owner that was removed from the study. And then at Denver 16, 15, 12 and 05, which are these sites through the middle of the county, there was mostly flat measurements, so there was no trend for those sites. You can see kind of slight declines, but the significance values are not enough to say that there's a trend, there's a clear trend there that couldn't be obtained through just random chance in the measurements. So those are kind of mostly flat conditions, what we call them. In the lower Dawson Aquifer, this is where we had the most consistency among trends. So we had negative trends throughout the western portion of the county, and then one site with a positive rising trend sort of in the lower southwest portion of the county. And you'll see on the potentiometric maps, also throughout the two April 2015 and 18 study periods, is a kind of an isolated little island of increasing trends, and that might be what we call a local recharge zone, or it might be, it is kind of by the eastern extent of the aquifer, it might be disconnected or connected to the upper Dawson, that area, and so be getting recharge. For the sites that didn't have a trend computed for them, or a significant trend, Lower Dawson 16 and Dawmass 16 did not have enough static measurements to compute a trend, so those were two of the frequent offenders. One of them had an irregular pattern, and it might have a stronger trend with a longer period of record, so that was Dawmass 28. So there is a consistency between the trends, but the R-squared value is not high enough to say that it's consistent throughout time. And then Lower Dawson had Lower Dawson 14 had a seasonal pattern with a slight decreasing trend, but it also was not significant. It might be stronger with a longer period of record as well, just a longer amount of time to compute the trend over. And that's also the site, that's the site right here, that we suspect to the upper Dawson through the perforations in the well. And this is the aquifer with the largest negative trends, which indicates kind of a decreasing water level through time. And then finally, the upper Dawson had 2 wells with a significant negative trend, and 3 wells with a significant static, or didn't have a significant, one of those kind of flat measurement, no trend direction. 3 of them had a increase, the trend was not significant, so again, those be Dawmass 22, UDAW 16, and UDAW 13. And then UDAW 15, which is by Ponderosa Park here, that site had a seasonal pattern with a slight decreasing trend, but it wasn't significant. And again, that one might be significant with a longer period of record. So 3 of the that might show a decreasing trend with a longer period of record. And then 18, that was caused by a change of owner. So able to access that well for quite a while, and so. And then for a pressure transducer in the well, you can see that the trends that were computed from the continuous measurements compare well to the discrete. They almost always have a higher p-value, indicating they're higher p-value and a slightly better R-squared, indicating they're a better trend sites or reliable value. And you can see that they with one another, they're in similar magnitude. And then for the Laramie site, that site that's right next to some center pivot irrigation, you can see that it didn't have a significant discrete trend, and it was actually include the continuous measurements. It did have a significant decreasing trend. And what that means is that the continuous logger was kind of filling in the gaps between those measurements, and you get a clearer picture of what's going on. You can also see consistency between the aquifers, so both the Upper Dawson and Lower Dawson sites. And these, even if the site is what we call one of those frequent offender non-static, we're able to compute trend for those sites because they have so many measurements filling in between the measurement points. And so that's kind of one of the benefits of using a continuous logger at those sites. To compute the difference between those two periods. And so I'll jump into first the Upper Dawson sites, and these are the hydrograph of the wells that were used for each of these measurements. And so you can see that from this orange portion of the county, between the two measurement periods, there was a slightly decline in levels in the potentiometric surface. And these two sites right here also had a significant negative trend, so that's kind of consistent with what we were seeing from the measurements. Those declining trends were significant at UDOT 14 and almost significant at UDOT 15, so not a significant trend, but with a longer period record it might be. At all the other wells, you had a rising trend, and so that would be all these hydrographs over here and this one. And those were significant at 3 of the wells that were used to create geometric surface, and almost significant at 2 of the other ones. So a lot of consistency as you get out to the eastern portion of the Upper Dawson Aquifer in Elbert County. When you jump to the Lower Dawson, this is where you again see consistency, but in the opposite direction. So between the two measurement periods, a lot of decline between the two of them, and you can see the trend at these wells for, I think, we'll see 4 of them were significant, and all of those were along the western or northwestern portion of the county. So that's these wells here, and then that Dawmass 28 well was significant. It might then be significant, and then the 2 rising trends that also show up in this map as sort of portions where it's hard to see the scale on this, but that's 0 to 2 feet between the 2 measurement periods, is that Dawmass 28 well that did show a significant rising trend. It might be a recharge zone. And then that one well that may be connected to the Upper Dawson shows a little kind of island of increase between the 2 periods. So like I said, this report is available for download and to view online to the public. Anyone can download it and data. From the Colorado Water Science Center webpage, there's this publications tab, and you can kind of sort by publication year and various other, I think you can search by type, so that would be kind of groundwater or water related, and you can find that report and download it. And this is also the static link to that report. And then you can also view data from that were used in this publication and any new data that's been collected since June 2018, which is when the report study period ended, but we've been collecting levels since then. From our data and tools tab on the Colorado Water Science Center webpage. And the 2 areas that you can view data there are from our National Water Information System. So if you click on this groundwater page, you can search by those site numbers that were presented in, I think it's table 1 of the report. And those links from those pages will take you to the what we call NWIS, the National Water Information System page for those individual sites. And then the other part is this groundwater watch tool, and you can kind of view a map of the distribution of the wells online and click on individual sites, and it will take you to kind of a data summary page for each site, and then also link to that NWIS page to view any data that were used in the report and any new data. And then anyone can access the online data through the R statistical software program, which is what I use to compute those trends. And that's what this, if you're familiar with using R, it's the data retrieval R package. And you could input site numbers and periods of record that you'd like to pull data from, and you can download data that way. So I'd just like to highlight a couple other recent studies that were also being conducted in the Denver Basin Aquifer System, and those are being conducted out of the Colorado School of Mines at the ConocoPhillips West Center, what they call that. It's the Water, Energy, Education, Science, and Technology Center, by a PhD student working with Terry Hogue in that group. And they have two publications out. One is this first one in Water Resources Research, and they did a more in-depth spatiotemporal study to look at interpolating water levels throughout the county, or throughout the Arapahoe aquifer, I should say. This is extending beyond the county level. So in the whole Denver Basin Aquifer System, using just the Colorado Division of Water Resource wells. So those are those little hash marks there. And so those have a much lower well density throughout each of the aquifers, but they do have a longer period of record. And so the first study was kind of developing a way to better compute changes in the aquifers through time. And then the second study, the assessment of groundwater depletion and implications for management, they used the methods from this first study and applied them to all 4 aquifers in the Denver Basin Aquifer System. So in the second one, they outlined the approach from the first article. They applied it, and then they computed a change in each of the aquifers from 1990 through 2016. So that's what these 4 maps are here, and that shows this is the decrease in meters in each of those aquifers according to their study. And they attribute a lot of this change, again, to front range population increase. They talk a little bit about declining precipitation throughout the study period. And then they also touch briefly on ongoing water projects such as aquifer storage and recovery, the WISE program. And then they note that some of these wells could use, or some of these areas could use a larger well density. So they didn't use any USGS wells in this study, and it is over a longer period. It's also important to note for the Dawson aquifer, they didn't differentiate between the lower and upper Dawson. And they didn't really touch on why they did that in the study, so it'd be interesting to reach out to them and see why they decided to include a confined or unconfined. But you can see for the other 3 aquifer systems, they saw a lot of declining levels throughout the study period from 1990 through 2016, which is kind of consistent with what we saw in the shorter term study with a much higher density of measurements and distribution throughout Elbert County. So it's good to see consistency between study reports, and sort of gives more significance to the findings. So talking about future work, I know Jim had asked if this is continuing on. So as it's currently funded, we are continuing to measure levels at these wells through December of 2020. And I don't believe there's another report planned through those wells, but we could always, do another report similar to this one to extend the record and trends that were computed in this report. And it's also important to note that the trends that were computed are only sort of valid for that 2015 through 2018 period. So longer monitoring and recomputing those trends after you have a longer period of record can kind of see if they're consistent and if they persist beyond the study period that was in that report. Also, like I said, a longer record may increase trend significance at those sites that didn't have a significant trend but seemed like they were following some trend that just wasn't robust enough to report on at this time. Also, we could potentially refocus some of the monitoring efforts to the western portion of the county. We could move or install more of those continuous loggers if there's sites that seem like they're good candidates for that. You can see that at one of those sites, the benefit of instrumenting your trend is less susceptible to pumping effects, and you get a clearer picture of the seasonal values. But that does come at a cost because there's more time to kind of correct and make sure that there's no drift in that record and approve the data for those continuous sites. And then something that could be done in the future is we could combine the results from the Elbert County network with the Douglas County USGS well network and some wells that we've also measured historically in El Paso County to look at more regional trends, kind of similar to what they did in this second study here, but using USGS wells, and apply potentially more advanced techniques to the USGS well data that they used. That could be a future direction that we could go. And I just want to say thank you for letting me get out in your beautiful county and measure wells, and thank you to the well owners that are here today. And we appreciate you allowing us access to collect the data that was used in this report. It's definitely valuable and allows us to see a better picture of what's going on in this study. So I'll open up to any questions and discussion, I guess, at this time as well.
My question is, what do you consider significant, finding or whatever?
As far as declines?
Yeah, declines or increases.
I mean, that depends on, I guess, the well owners in the Board of County Commissioners, so the USGS, we're not in the business of sort of making policy recommendations. We collect, pretty robust data and kind of show where it's significant, where it's not. I'd say if there are wells that are maybe susceptible to potentially going dry or needing to lower pumps, that could be considered significant, but that would sort of be a discussion to have with property owners.
Kind of looked in your maps, if anything over about a foot a year, you were at least putting on the maps as significant.
Yeah.
I think that's what
Yeah,
Rick was
one
trying
thing
to
we
get
did
to,
note in the
so.
study is that the Lower Dawson Aquifer, the other aquifer systems that did have declining trends, did show a pretty small trend small average trend from the significant sites. And so it is noted that it is a decreasing trend, but it is very small compared to the Lower Dawson, which had much greater average trend.
But don't you think that's related to well count?
Well count?
Yeah, because the Upper Dawson looks like it's recharging roughly equivalent to what the withdrawals are, but that's because recharge is available to it. The Lower Dawson, it's not, but that's shallow enough that that's where the majority of or significant portion of the domestic wells are, and also some of the town wells, I think. And then once you go below that to the Arapahoe, and you see a rapid drop off in the number of wells per aquifer.
Yeah, it could be a result of the number of wells that did have significant trends, but even the consistency among them was more consistent in the Lower Dawson compared to the other four, or the other three, I should say, not the Upper Dawson, which showed
Could that also mean that the Lower Dawson formation is a little more homogeneous?
It could be. We'd have to look at that Paschke report of the Denver Basin aquifers. I believe they had maps of conductivity throughout each of the aquifers, and you could see it's at a 1 kilometer scale, so it's not a very fine resolution, but you could see the resolution that they came up with to see how heterogeneous each aquifer system is.
Now, you referred to the Foursquare report in your thing more than once. I didn't count them, but
Yeah.
Did you find that when you read that report that it was helpful to us?
It was helpful, yeah. We mostly referred to it in this report because they had identified some of the areas that the county was interested in and concerned with. That would be the Elizabeth, Kiowa area, and I think the Northwest Planning area, which is why we focused these two maps on the western portion of the county, because they included those planning areas. And I believe they used some information from the Douglas County study that came out, I think in 2013. And so that's something where including Douglas County, like you said, including more wells, in a study might be useful in the future, including more USGS wells that extend beyond the county limit and kind of give a more regional picture might be useful, because we do have Upper Dawson, Lower Dawson wells in Douglas County in the study, as well as more Denver. I believe more Denver and a few Arapahoe and Laramie wells as well, but those are all kind of on the western extents of those
Now, you
aquifers.
did mention that we're going to continue the monitoring through 2020.
Yes.
Should this be something that's carried on forever, or is this something that this snapshot's good enough?
Like I said, those.
I doubt it, but.
Yeah, like I said, those trends are only sort of valid and computed for the study period in this report. To see if they persist long-term, it would be good to continue some level of monitoring. I can say in Douglas County, what they did is they instrumented more wells with the continuous logger that are measured 4 times a year. So we visit those because they need to be serviced with a kind of a desiccant pack that makes sure that the logger doesn't get too much moisture, because that can cause the instrument to go bad. So we have to get out there regularly to service and measure them, so that we can see if there's any drift as well. But those are only measured 4 times a year, and then the entire Douglas County network gets measured once a year. And so they, similar to this study, they used to measure at a higher frequency to kind of get a better picture, and then after the first report came out, they cut back on the measurement frequency to kind of, I guess, to save some money on the report, or save some money on the study. And
Just as a general conclusion from all of this, up in the northwest corner, if we approve future subdevelopments, it sounds like we shouldn't let them use the Lower Dawson. We should let them make them use deeper formations, because those aren't being utilized to the same extent as the Lower Dawson.
yeah, potentially. I mean, like again, that's a policy issue. That's a policy decision, but that is where we are seeing the largest declines, is in that western extent of the county.
Yeah, I would just, thank you for coming in. I know there's a lot of work involved in this. We've talked this, water, roads, and finances in general are the topics we deal with regularly. So I think we are committed to the long term, and we probably couldn't have mentioned it more often throughout, that it's important to keep this going. For the four sites that dropped, recommendations for replacement, or would you like some assistance in trying to identify homeowners that would like to be added to the study? Or?
Yeah, I think if we do end up kind of refocusing some of the monitoring efforts, if that's a direction you'd like to go, then it would help to either solicit homeowners or see if there's other target areas that you want to focus more monitoring efforts on, and
So
see
I have
who's in.
some concern. Just that map, I think, is extremely telling in terms of potential migration. I don't know where the center of those drawdown areas are, if they're right on the Douglas County side or deeper into Douglas County. It would be kind of nice to see
And it
what
would be interesting.
impacts the growth on our borders. Or
I believe we do have some of the Douglas County study wells are pretty close to the Elbert County border.
interesting to see if those could be
And then
brought together.
unfortunately, one of the wells, can't remember if it's this one or this well. Actually, I'm pretty sure it's this one, because it's really close to the town of Elizabeth. That the property owner did change, and they requested to be removed from the study because they were renting it out. They didn't want people accessing the well, and so we did lose one of the sites that was pretty crucial to making this map and to computing a trend.
Yeah, I think to say on the policy side, I know we had discussed internally requiring developers to start monitoring their wells. So
Yeah, and that's
as we
something,
go forward,
if
that
they
we
do
know what the
put in a
impacts are.
monitoring well could be significant, because it wouldn't be susceptible to the non-static pumping conditions that we might see at the wells. And if it's instrumented, it's just easier to access than some of the wells might be
Is there
susceptible to that.
anything going on in Arapahoe County, or are they
Not that
pulling so much from
not that I'm aware of, besides the Colorado Division of Water Resource Monitoring that they do. Yes.
City of Elizabeth is doing a comprehensive plan.
Excuse me, sir. I would ask if there's public comment or question, if you could use the mic, just so our, you can come up to this.
With identifying.
Get things for the minutes.
Larry Gable. City of Elizabeth is working on a comprehensive plan right now, on growth. They're projecting about 25,000 to 30,000. What kind of impact can that be?
But without seeing the plan, it's hard to plan that. I think, are they susceptible to the?
What I've heard, they're leaning towards adopting that. Right now, they do not,
Okay.
as a municipality. But we did give a grant, but we certainly would encourage Elizabeth to adopt that 300-year water rule. I mean, we've seen the difference it makes in El Paso. And
Study, and as well as the, they do look a little bit at the increase in number of wells based off the Colorado Division of Water Resource well permit database, and kind of show that between the study periods there was a large increase just in the number of new permits that were issued for each of those. So that'd be, might attribute some of the increased drawdown to the Edison well in new well permits. Any other questions?
any questions or comments for the presenter or us?
And I do have a couple of copies, I think 3 or 4 bound copies of the report, if anyone would like to take one.
All right. I mentioned this earlier. A few months back, we adopted a policy regarding the invocations and the opening ceremony for our meetings. Part of that was I need to annually make an announcement that we welcome in priority pastors of churches that are ordained pastors that have churches within the county, and then if we can't fill our schedule, we also welcome lay folks to come and open the meeting. So that's my public announcement. Moving on, our next discussion item was just a quick update on audit results from 2018.
Commissioner Sam Albrecht, County Manager. So we had a work study session yesterday with Reuben Brown, our auditor, kind of giving us a quick preview of where we are and the work that they have done so far, and getting ready to provide the final audit report, which will be June 26th at the BoCC meeting. They will be coming to give the formal audit report. As you may know, they started work in December of last year to prepare for this audit, and spent a lot of time here also in April with our team and going through all the details to prepare for that audit. Since we do use quite a bit of federal monies, especially in HHS, we do this audit in addition to the county-wide. I think we will be very pleased with the results. That we're going to get, from my understanding, an unmodified, basically a clean position on the audit. They did throw out a few kudos to the team. Certainly everybody helped out. They said that we've also made significant procedures, especially in our grant policies and our overall So we will hear more from them on the 26th.
Sam just pointed out, we did have a meeting with the auditors yesterday. I was very pleased with how and how they've produced good information.
Any public comment? I would invite you all to attend on the 26th. I mean, dry stuff, but very important, and having a clean audit and a rising net position is a good thing for any organization. So, moving on, action items first is just approval of minutes from our last meeting.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we approve the minutes of May 22nd, 2019 as presented and
To adopt the minutes or accept the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The next item we have up is this be the second reading and after publication commercial vehicle again, this just adds the ability for the sheriff's office to enforce vehicle model traffic code for the state on commercial vehicles coming through the county. And with the growth in construction, we're seeing a lot more trucks coming through that are beating up roads, so it's important that we keep an eye on them. So Tim, you were here, did you have anything that you wanted to add, or?
Nothing.
Yeah. We've published, this is the second reading we can adopt today, and as I understand, you've got folks that are trained.
Yes,
do we have scales, or?
We don't have, we have we would appreciate seeing more one on 20 weekend, so we're looking to get it passed and start going out and enforcing and doing safety inspections as well on these.
Okay, thank you.
will you be able to do it also on the state highways?
Yes, sir.
All right, sounds good. I'd accept a motion at this point to adopt this, and then we'll open for any public comment before vote.
I'll make a motion that we adopt the commercial vehicle model traffic code ordinance.
I'd also suggest commissioners to increase to add to that part of that motion a finding that this ordinance is necessary for immediate preservation of public health, safety, and welfare.
Okay. Rick, would you take that as a friendly amendment?
Yes, I will amend the motion to include that wording.
Okay. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, we've got a motion and a second. Is there any public comment on this? Seeing none, any comment at this table?
No, it's another one of those things that has to be done.
Yeah, we've been discussing it frequently at several meetings and a couple last year as well. So having a motion and a second, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye, the motion carries. It's yours, Tim. Okay. Moving on, board planning. I know what I'm tracking, certainly the briefing on the audit results, our formal briefing on that. I'd also ask, since they did come up today, if we could have Rory or come and speak to us just about the IGA on Pine Ridge Road and where that stands. That would be useful. And then I'm not sure whether it would fall in CDS or BART or between the two of you, just a look at the E86 service plan and see what they are authorized under that plan to do with water in terms of provision just within, or if they did have some allowance to sell water.
And to whom?
Yeah. Yeah. Anything specific?
No, I think that's covers it.
Yeah. Probably time for an update on the IT study as well. Yeah. Rick, anything? No. Okay. Anything from the staff side that you know is going to be on there, or needs?
Briefly about possibly doing just to get on the zoning and also the building code.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, yeah, and I guess there was another just along with the zoning, and this is more on the Public Works building side, issues that have come up within the adopted building code that we'll be needing to advertise and look at in a similar manner to the way we've been handling subdivision and zoning changes. All righty. I think that gives us enough to start for our next meeting. For now, we're in recess. We'll reconvene at 1 p.m. to look at some land use items. Thanks for coming out, folks.